Hello, everyone. You are listening to episode 301 of the At Percussion podcast. I am your host, Ksenia Komljenović, and as always, here with my fabulous entourage, Karli Viña.
Hey, Ksenija.
Hey, Karli. Good to see you. How are you doing? I see Shenandoah all over social media. Your percussion studio is thriving.
Trying to get the word out there, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll tell you how I'm doing is great. Last night, I got to hear the National Symphony Orchestra for my first live orchestra concert being in the audience since the pandemic, and it was incredible to hear an orchestra in a concert hall.
What'd they play?
They played Brahms' Violin Concerto with Hilary Hahn. You know, no big deal. It was pretty great. And then Florence Price Symphony No. 3. Was the second half, and it was cool. There's this cool xylophone solo. It was great. They played great.
That's awesome. Well, we are double jealous now. You got the cool gig, and you're close to awesome orchestras that you can hear. That's great. That's great.
Kind of brag a little bit.
That's good. Go brag away, girl.
But things are getting back to normal. It's good.
It is.
A little bit. Concerts.
Good. Yeah. Ben Charles, what's up?
Hey, Ksenia.
Anything fantastic to report?
I actually have a free weekend for once, which is nice.
Oh.
It's nice to own my own time. It's so great. That's as good as hearing any symphony to me right now.
A bit of silence is always good. Nice, nice. And then our one and only, completely irreplaceable Casey Cangelosi.
Oh, thanks. Well, I didn't have a free weekend, nor did I see a symphony, so I'm just in a foul mood now. But I'm looking forward. I'm hoping Evan's mic peaks at some point, so I'll be like, "Whoa, Evan, what are you doing? level your mic. Do you even know what that means?
Do you even know what you're doing? Don't give away who our guests are yet. The listeners don't know. Evan.
Right. Yeah, there's no way they know. Yeah, you're right.
There's no way that they know. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. My bad.
The name of the show. So we're releasing this episode on October 14, and here's what happened in music history. Not too much. First of all, everything comes back to Stravinsky for me. So in 1898, he composed his first little tarantella for piano. He was 16, little boy, and then 15 years later, boom, The Rite of Spring. And you can go and check out that little ditty. Someone supposedly found it and put it on YouTube, this little phrase. It sounds very rudimentary, but very Stravinsky. So go check that out. 1952, we have a birthday. Happy birthday, Kaija Saariaho, the famous Finnish composer, the wonderful lady with the fiery hair that has composed everything that will melt your brain as you think about it. Just go check that out or listen to some of her interviews. She's a very, very wise, beautiful person. And lastly, everything also somehow comes back to Bernstein. He passed away on this day in 1990. And I read this little thing in the New York Times, which said 2 hours before his death from a heart attack at 6:15 p.m. on a Sunday, Bernstein was visited by Bright Shang, a young Chinese composer. When I walked in, Shang says, he was watching a Yo-Yo Ma simulcast, which we assume is like a Zoom concert-ish, something in the 90s, who knows, something like that. They were playing Rachmaninoff and he was humming along. He looked himself, was very much himself, and we spoke about many things. He was lucid, even witty. I was happy for him at that moment. And then 2 hours later, due to many health complications and incessant smoking, and some would say that's love of life and others would argue against, but in any case, he passed away. So that's it. We lose some, we win some, and then also Stravinsky composes something on every day, so I can always get away with music history by talking about Stravinsky. So there you go, everybody. That was a little thing. All right, so now I want to move on to our fabulous guests, because these people today are one of those rare percussionists whose bio is literally 3 sentences long because they do not need to say anything anymore. Then that, they're those hardworking and lucky ones who can say that they have worked with the likes of Steve Reich and Joshua Bell and Bang on a Can and the New York Phil, Jack Quartet, Wynton Marsalis, Carnegie Hall, Eastman School of Music, and so many other huge names. And the folks that are behind the insanely successful young production company 410 Media. And our guests are Evan Chapman and Kevin Eikenberg. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, so great to have you. You guys are just Wow, so much stardust on you. And you shine your stars now on your own. So tell us, we want to first learn about how this collaboration started. So you played Delacluse a lot in a practice room for each other, and then you were like, hey, screw this, let's just go film something. How did that happen?
Not quite. We go a little bit farther back than Delacluse. So
Okay.
we've actually been friends since second grade. So we met each other in elementary school, and we lived like up the street from each other.
I was gonna say
So-
swap out Delacluse with like Backstreet Boys, and
Yeah.
then that's more the time frame that we met.
Yeah, we were more like just picked up drumsticks is when it began. We were playing Louie Louie for the first time. That was the first thing I ever learned on drum set. But yeah, so it goes pretty far back, and then we both were percussionists all throughout it, and through elementary school, middle school, high school, did all the talent show. We did like double drumming, like talent show things. So we did a lot of that stuff, and then when I guess I kind of got into filming stuff first in high school, because Evan had a very successful YouTube channel that was great, and with lots of cool covers, drum set covers and stuff.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Everyone should go bang in the backlog of Evan's
Yeah,
YouTube
I
channel.
know what you're talking about. I saw that.
They're great. So I filmed like a bunch of those with him back in the day, and then we kind of both got into it, and then I'll tell my half, because then our paths diverged before joining again. So my half was I ended up kind of going the film route, and then I actually started at Ithaca College, and then I switched because I couldn't do both music and film up there. It was just too much, because that music program is super intense, and the film program is pretty intense there too. So I transferred out, and I went to American University for the rest of the time down in DC, where it was a bit easier to do both. And so I kind of did both throughout there, but always kind of combining the music and film aspects of things. And then after that, Evan and I kind of got back together. We were both doing the same thing, and we were like, let's just do this together. But I'll let Evan tell his half of the story, and then he'll continue it till today.
Yeah, my entry into film was, I think, a little more like maybe scrappy and DIY than Kevin's. Like Kevin kind of was a fan of movies and actually like, proper filming of things. And for me, it was very much just like camcorders and skateboards and that kind of stuff. So it was a lot more of just like kind of like scrappy way in. But but I think like Kevin got the bug of like everything visual in addition to percussion and music and drums, because we were already drummers. But then we started to kind of see the possibilities of what would happen when we combined them. So we did some very early collaborations back in like high school of just like basically that was kind of like the start of the YouTube video song kind of thing. And so we did like Imogen Heap, like hide and seek cover together, and like just filming. Like the main purpose of the collaborations was to make a video. It wasn't to put it on a concert or anything. And so then when Kevin went to Ithaca and then AU, I went over to IU in Bloomington. It was pretty much full on percussion. I didn't double major in film in any way. But like once I kind of got past the initial hurdle of like totally overwhelmed by everything music school, then I started to kind of like find my footing a little bit, and then picked back up a camera, like maybe late sophomore year, early junior year. And then from then on, it kind of just spiraled into like my friends and the other studio mates and other colleagues just like noticing that I was filming things, and just started to ask for that more and more. And so I was like filming recital videos and taking my friends like headshots and that kind of stuff. And then kind of rejoining where Kevin got to at the end. We were both graduated, and we're basically just freelancing separately, doing really similar things. So filming recitals and live shows and taking pictures of musicians and band shots and that kind of stuff. And after doing that separately, we kind of just like reconnected, and we were like, we're doing the exact same thing, but in different places. So we might as well just combine forces and make it into a company and be in the same location. And that was kind of the birth of 410, was that moment. Pretty much have been doing it together ever since.
This is rehashing a little bit since the last time Evan was on the podcast, but Evan, last time you said something I thought was like really, really good and interesting. And it's that like as students, we learn pieces and we play it on a jury or maybe a recital, and then that's sort of it. We kind of forget about it. And Evan had like this like idea that was really interesting of basically like I want some sort of like token, like something I can keep from learning that piece. And you said like basically you just started recording a piece to have like a record of it. And like I remember there's like I think a recording of you playing Virginia Tate and like I think one of Casey's pieces. And it's just like, oh yeah, like that's what undergrad students should be doing in 2021. Like it shouldn't just be a learn a piece and then put it in the, you know, put it in your back pocket and forget about it for until the next time you pull it out.
Yeah, both Kevin and I have always like prioritized just kind of having the video like recording and representation of a piece be just as important as the premiere itself. It almost feels like anticlimactic to just like play a piece for an audience and then just kind of like it falls out of your hands and then you don't play it for a couple years or whatever, or if ever again. And so I think Kevin, you filmed your senior recital as well, and like that was always just a big part of us even going back to school, was like we should film these pieces well, because that's equally as valid as the recital or whatever it is itself, especially in 2021. It's really important to have that.
Yeah, not to go too far ahead here, but and then we just kind of extended that, you know, taking recitals, which is like, you know, it's just the recital, which is fine, and that's great, and that's like the baseline, and that's kind of where we started. But then we were like, but like they don't usually look great, you know, because it's theater lighting, you know, and so it's all just like massive front light, and you know, it doesn't look good, and you're not performing for the camera, you're performing for the audience. So, you know, it's not necessarily, and we were both so into like film and stuff, so it was pretty natural to this for us to just be like, well, yeah, let's just erase the audience part and just do it for a camera, because it can just, you know, you can, even if you only get 200 views on a video, you know, sometimes that's more than you get in the recital hall anyway. So yeah,
it's I think it's cool and worth noting, especially to the young listeners, that, you know, on Evan's YouTube channel, like the oldest video back, and I know I've referred to Evan's channel, I mean, many times over the years, just to say like, hey, look where this person started. And like, you can really watch the progression go from like interest and very clear, like heavy interest, to professional. And it's only 13 years ago. Like your first video on there, Evan's like you're like a young kid and you're playing drum set, and it's clear you already know like something what you're doing, but I don't know. It's funny. The people we talk to like stick with it, whether it's being so percussion or being third coast percussion. We've never talked to third coast percussion on the show, but we've heard this. Like it's like it takes like 10 years of like really going at something hard and like continuing to do it. 'Cause I think a lot of young people would look at one of your current productions and think like, oh yeah, there's no way like in hell I could do that. It's like, right, and we don't expect you could do that right now, but you could start. Like imagine in 13 years you could be doing that. It's like, well, you guys are proof. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, like filmmaking kind of requires practice just like anything does, and I feel like we go through shoots where things don't go well, and it's a learning process, and it almost feels like the same thing of like a hard practice session or something. Like you're just like, well, that didn't go how I wanted it to, and what can we learn from that? And we're always kind of like debriefing after shoots of like what didn't go well and what went well, and you have to stick with it and practice it just like anything else.
You know, you've done well on the podcast if people start quoting your sentences back at you, or if Ben starts remembering things, it means it's really impactful, or people, you know, tell you, sort of re-narrate your life back at you, means you've done something serious. Okay, so you've sort of covered the next thing that I want to talk about, which is what kind of training you have. So Kevin did actually do film in school, and then Evan is brilliant and picked up, and they partnered really well. But the thing that I think is most important about going to music school is that you establish a relationship with your mentor. It's not about the person who's going to tell you, you know, what eighth notes suck and what don't. It's about this person who you can call 10 years later and have a meaningful conversation about your career and so on. So who is that for you as filmmakers? Do you have someone that you go and talk to, or is this all intuition plus learning curves?
I'm trying to think. We have people that we love to work with all the time, and we kind of exist in a film world, kind of like in a bubble, because we do, relatively large productions and that kind of stuff, but like they're usually within like our framework. So we do have people that we talk with when we have to like go into the actual film world a little bit. And when we're like, oh, right, we need to, like, you say things this way, like we missed some of the terminology because we didn't necessarily, I went to film school, but I wouldn't say it was the most helpful thing in the world. I would say, honestly, the music side of things was more enlightening because it was just more like hands off and more like, yeah, dude, that sounds cool, do it, as opposed to the other stuff where it was less. It was like the film side of things, it was much more structured, which felt a little strange to me. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so yeah, so I don't know if there's necessarily like a film person that like I met like at school or something that I go back to ask things. Like we kind of both, I feel like, grew in our own soil with that didn't have many people that told us like how they do it in the real world, I guess is one way to say it. But yeah, we have people that we work with all the time where we're just like, okay, we have this project coming up. First of all, can you come help us with it? Second of all, how should we prep for this? Those kinds of things. But yeah.
I'm glad you went first because that gave me a second to think this through, because it's kind of a tough question. But yeah, I second what Kevin said about how like in the film world, I actually feel like it's more like us bouncing off of our peers, like instead of kind of like a hierarchical like mentorship that we've like had with anyone. Like I feel like we have people that we work with closely or whose work that we admire, that we just are always kind of like pushing each other and like inspiring each other and asking questions. And like we had this really big project come up within the last month, and like our first instinct was to call this one person that we just really trust, like but it's all kind of like our peers. It's just people who are figuring out together. That said, I think like the mentorship on the music side, like for me at IU, of just like the professors that I had there, actually helps 410 a lot too. Like it wasn't a traditional like film, like this, kind of older generation director who we ask everything with. But I feel like the just all of the music related stuff and like sensitivity and working together and like chamber skills and like that all weirdly plays into film a lot, actually, of like being able to like make these like musically informed plans for films and knowing how to like be in a room with a chamber ensemble. Like those are all skills that I learned as a musician, but then they like translate really actually pretty linearly into our film work as well. So it's kind of like a weird, like, yeah, I feel like we didn't really, like we weren't the descendants of any like film people guiding the way, but it's more like we were that for music, but then kind of translated it in our own specific way into video.
Well, it makes sense. You've studied the thing you're filming.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you understand music, you know what to film when,
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cool.
So speaking of mentorship, I wonder, I imagine one or both of you at some point had some role model in your educational lives saying, you're splitting your time between music and film and all of these things. Why don't you spend more time in the practice room, or why don't you spend more time focusing on filmmaking? I guess my question is, what's your advice for maybe some of our younger listeners that might have some diverse interests that could work out very, very well as it has for you both? How do we balance these things?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but when we started, like there wasn't really ever like a 5 or 10 or like 15-year plan. It was just like something that we cared a lot about and then just started doing without really thinking through like what it was going to mean for us as a career, like anything. And I don't know. I feel like that's kind of just what, like, if you're really interested in something, just like try to find ways to do it as often as you can. I mean, for both Kevin and I, we were very much like in the early days, especially in undergrad, like squeezing in creative projects whenever we could, whether it was like late at night after a rehearsal where we like stayed longer in the concert hall that we had booked or whatever it was. It was always just like squeezing the time in. And I feel like if you just feel really passionately about something. Like we just both love film and music, so then decided to make a company that combines film and music. It's like, yeah, I don't know if that was a good answer, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I think the one advantage I had, well, there's a couple of advantages, but the one advantage I had with going to American University, since it's not really a big program in any way, or like a a world-renowned program of any kind. Not to poo-poo AU. I enjoyed AU. Sorry, AU. But it's not Peabody, so that was, if anything, it's actually kind of helpful, because it was pretty, like, they were very chill with me doing whatever I wanted, as long as it was like, oh, you're progressing, you're not progressing necessarily in like the linear way of like, oh, we're going to get you in an orchestra now, you're not doing anything like that. But, my teacher, Nobuo Matsuoka, who's great, and she was just like a rock and marimba player. And I was like, I think I want to do like a Radiohead track on my senior senior recital, and do like some weird experimental film on top. Like, it's not hard to play at all. Like, I can play it right now without even like practicing it. It's like 3 notes. And she was like, oh, okay, all right, so like that kind of helped let me do a bit more kind of out there stuff without feeling like I needed to fit into like a studio that was under someone else's tutelage, so that was like a little bit of an advantage there, where I had a little bit more of a loosey goosey kind of, I can do both of those easier, if that adds to that answer.
When we talk of unconventional or creative career paths like this, it reminds me a long time ago at this point, we had Bill Kahn on. And I asked, like, so when you started Nexus and, you had all these experimental music ideas and all, what'd your parents think of it? And he said, we didn't really tell our parents, was his answer. But I think it's a valid concern, like, obviously not literally just your parents, but like, what did your parents or people in your life think when you were like, yeah, we're going to like start a media company, kind of, we're going to focus on like recording contemporary percussion at first, at least. So what was your take on people's reaction?
Well, our parents have known that we've been best friends since elementary school. So they're like, oh, cool, you're starting a company with your friend? That sounds fun. But I understand your question. I mean, I think it's just like clear when somebody's like really into something or into like a combination of things. Like, I feel like it can be pretty clear when like they just want to eat, sleep, and breathe that like thing. And it's like, even if you don't really understand what it is that they're doing, or like you don't understand like what a contemporary percussion quartet is in the case of Nexus, like it's still like, I feel like to the people around you who know what you're like when you're like, fulfilled and inspired and want to do something, then it's like, I don't really get what you're doing, but I feel like it's making you happy and fulfilled, so go for it. I feel like that was kind of our situation as well. Like, I feel like, it's a pretty weird thing to describe, like the very specific niche that 410 is, and even like the kind of music that Square Peg is. And it's like, they're very specific things to describe, but I think the people around us who have supported us, and like my professors and Kevin's professor that he was just talking about, like when they see you really inspired and want to do something, it's like, cool, that seems like it's working for you, so do that, I guess.
Yeah, we were lucky to have really great parents that were super chill, and they were like, oh, you're gonna move to Philly and start a company with Evan, all right, so it was like, oh. So yeah, I actually, for the first year out of college, I filmed, or first 2 years, I filmed weddings. So that was like my first like out of college gig, which was rough, but that was my first one. And then we kind of filtered in some 410 gigs, and then I think it was like late 2015, early 2016 is when we kind of pulled the trigger on 410 as a whole. But yeah, I think my dad only just like a year ago figured out how to concisely say what we do. So,
I would really like to see the 410 version of a wedding video.
Very
Yes,
dark, very gloomy. Everyone's
we just filmed this. Yeah. We just filmed
two this past year.
Yeah. It's Scott Quady, who was at Vic Firth, and then Pascal Leboeuf, composer. We filmed their weddings. And Molly, he married Molly Heron, who's also a great composer. Anyway.
Oh my God. Okay, so we know how to when to contact you. You do everything: weddings, funerals, everything.
we don't usually advertise our wedding services, but to the inner circle.
I'd like you to record my funeral if that's.
Fantastic. Okay, so if you had to pie chart your activities, how much are you a musician? How much are you a filmmaker right now, today, at least? Because I'm sure it's difficult to do that.
I think I'm definitely farther film, I think, or just video side than Evan. I would probably say I'm like 85-15 video to music, honestly, at this stage. Every now and then I'll like do a fun thing with some friends, do that kind of a thing, but mostly 85, like 15, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends just based on the stretch of time that we're in. I mean, I feel like overall, maybe it's like, I don't know, 65-35 or something. I mean, there are definitely stretches that are really heavy, like square peg stretches are really heavy, like my solo work stretches where I'm like definitely like out of 410 land for like a stretch of a couple weeks or something. And then there are definitely times that are vice versa. So it can be a little crazy just balancing, and it takes a lot of like deliberate just planning ahead and carving out time. But yeah, definitely. And I feel like things have just gotten completely thrown out of whack, obviously because of COVID, and Square Peg was like, touring and playing, and that those plans got shut down as it did for a lot of other people. So recently it's been a ton of 410 work. Square Peg's been working on an album, and we're definitely playing a little bit, but yeah, we haven't done a kind of stretch of shows for a little while, so it feels very 410 heavy at the moment, which is great. But yeah, it's just a matter of like carving out that time pretty far ahead of time, because 410 books like 3 to 5-ish months ahead of time, and so it's like if we want to do a Square Peg show, it's got to be like on the calendar a little ways away. So yeah.
So tell us, your company, you said it's about 5-6 years old when you decided it was going to be the real deal. And when and how did you get your first high profile gig? Because you have so many amazing names as your clients.
Yeah, Kevin and I were chatting about what we thought this might be, like the first like kind of official, like, I guess, higher profile thing. I mean, we both have an answer and they come at it from different places. I think in my mind, the first time that I remember like sitting down with Kevin and like making a storyboard, like a shot list for a video that was under the umbrella of contemporary classical music, that was with a client that like people knew, was So Percussion playing Bryce Dessner's Music for Wooden Strings, which in my mind is just at the time was like very high profile to me, as like a So fanboy, but also like knowing that Bryce was likely to see it, and he's like a hero of the National is one of our favorite bands, and also the fact that it was going to end up on Vic Firth, which I'm not sure if that was the first video that ended up on Vic Firth, but it was one of the first.
It was one of them.
Yeah, and so that just felt like it was a video that actually had like a solid landing point that wasn't just like our Facebook pages for our parents, our aforementioned parents. Yeah, so that one is the one that sticks out for me, which was the result of honestly just kind of like a long relationship building with the guys in So through SOCI, through their summer institute. I think So, like, for different projects that come up for us, like we always come back to them, like they somehow always come back to So in some way.
They're like the OGs for us.
Yeah, they were like really like the first like new group that really like trusted us to do kind of our style of filmmaking with them, and have like stuck with us ever since. And yeah, I feel like a lot of our connections kind of somehow all go back to like meeting So way back when. So yeah, they've been great.
Yeah, and then kind of right not right after that, but that was like our first. I don't even think I had moved to Philly yet, so that was like our first. We were working on like just the gear that we both had brought to the table, so we didn't have a ton of a ton of gear. We didn't have yeah, so that was like our first kind of thing. And then after we moved to Philly and we were like, okay, here's 410 headquarters, whatever. It was we did this job for the Pig Iron Theater Company here in Philly, which is probably like our first like produced like music video, I guess, where it's like, it's not like the piece where we're just watching the piece happen and we light it. Well, it's like a narrative element happening to it, because they just took this 5-act, absolutely bonkers, like abstract theater piece. It was amazing. Contemporaneous was in it. Troy Harrion did the soundtrack, and then the Crossing Choir, who we work with all the time now, was like in it as well. The Temple or the Drexel wrestling team was in. It was bonkers. But we did like a video for them, and that was like our first where we had to rent equipment. We never rented gear before. We didn't know how to set up like a frame with like a piece of fabric to bounce light into, like a 12-foot thing. It was in the Naval Yard here in Philly, just like an abandoned like part of the Naval Yard down there that they got for us to do it in there. So it was like a lot of firsts that now we like are used to using all the time, rental orders for lots of things. So that was like our first, I guess you could call it high profile kind of thing. Like after we got to Philly, where we had a lot of unknowns begin.
That sounds really exciting. And I love the stories. Maybe you're going to share some on here, but also everyone can just go and find your other conversations that are on YouTube, where you talk about how you went into an abandoned ship without any power and figuring that out, and then making a singer learn the piece backwards so that the video can unravel in such a way that the feathers are going upwards. And it's just amazing. It's so fascinating. But okay, so what kind of prep work do you do when you are commissioned, to do some work? You mentioned a storyboard. Tell us, what do we need to know? So you don't just show up with cameras and you know how to make people look pretty?
I mean, there's definitely like Kevin and I just like always do it together, and so there's definitely a shorthand with us where we might not need to prep things that maybe other companies do when they're working with collaborators for the first time or whatever. But definitely depends on the concept for the piece, and the concept definitely depends on honestly like how active the piece is, or how much like the piece demands from the visuals, like how fast the edit is or that kind of thing. So there are definitely like pieces that just lend themselves to a lot more like improvisational filmmaking, where we feel comfortable like showing up to a location. We know the location is going to be cool, and we basically like set up all the parameters so that when we actually get there, there's not a ton that we needed to have talked about in terms of like storyboards or shot lists or anything. It just feels very natural. But then there are other pieces, maybe the piece is really long, and so we know we're going to have like a lot of ground to cover, and so we really need to think through like how we're going to make it from the beginning to end in an engaging way. Or just, yeah, like the complexity of the edit. Kevin mentioned filming Pascal Leboeuf's wedding recently, and we've done some collaborations with him, which are always very like active and visually heavy, and there's just tons of cuts and tons of setups, and that kind of stuff needs to be heavily planned out ahead of time. We definitely can't just show up and like assume that we're going to make a video for a Pascal piece. It's got to be thought through. But then there are like slower, more like minimalist pieces where we know like we have one dancer in a cool looking space and we can pretty much show up and I think it's going to be great. So it depends on the project and the piece.
Have you ever had that client like Michael Scott when they filmed the commercial and he's like, all right, I have this thing in mind and it's above and beyond what's possible or even like in good taste? Like how much?
We try and get all that out of the way as
do the
early
wave,
as
do the wave at the end of the video.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
Dunder Mifflin commercial.
we try. Luckily, we don't have that issue very much. Like usually, I feel like people trust us, and then are like, okay, cool. Like sometimes people will come with us with some ideas, and they're not necessarily bad ideas, but it's just like not attainable in the space, it's like, we're gonna do a dinosaur. That's never happened, but like, and it's like, well, I don't know if we can do that, so we definitely have like some things like that, but usually we just try to usually all it is it's like, you can see the kernel of what they actually want. And then we're kind of like, oh, okay, I see what you want to do here. Let's just tweak it in this way. And one, make it either doable, like if we couldn't have done it the other way, or just like have it fit into, because Evan and I we kind of have an aesthetic, quote unquote. So, trying to make it fit, into something that inspires us as well. So it's a little bit collaborative in that way, but it's not often we get something where we're just like, oh God, it's like, that would be awful. It's not too often.
Was it Michael Burritt?
Oh no,
Michael's always great. One other small piggyback onto that is that I feel like also over the years, I think we've just gotten a little more effective at like the pre-production process, and also we've been through enough projects that we kind of like can really quickly pick up on red flags or anything that, like, if somebody like mentions something in passing in a call, it's like, I feel like we're pretty in tune with where things might kind of veer off from like what's within the scope or whatever. And so I feel like we've gotten pretty good at kind of working out those kinks pretty far ahead of time, so there's no crazy surprises when we show up at the shoot. Like, we're all kind of on the same page. I think that might have been kind of like a thing that a trap that we used to fall into when we were first starting out, was like assuming a lot of things, or like assuming that we were on the same page with people, or like not having enough pre-production conversations. And so when we showed up to actually do the thing, it was like, or even after, like in the editing process, we show the footage and it's like nothing like what they wanted it to be. And so we've learned to be a lot more just, collaborative, and we're always like showing footage at the shoots and just making sure that we're very much on the same page, so there's no surprises from anybody.
So I listen to a lot of music business related podcasts, and a lot of them talk about video, because you all are the most important way for any musician to talk to their audience. And it turns out that we live in the era of people preferring shitty videos over nice videos, as it seems on social media. So this whole thing of like, oh, we just want vertical videos, and we want things that look homemade and look selfie made, which I have a particular distaste for. So what are the pros then of creating such beautiful artwork that you do in a day, when this has to happen so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of the time, like for me, it's two separate things, like, because there's definitely like part of a social media strategy of just like posting something on your story every day, but it could just be like you in a practice room, or something, or just like a taste where you want it to feel intimate and like homemade and homegrown, and just like, not like you put that much effort into it. There's like an intimacy with that, which I get, I get why people like that, because it is like a very like intimate feeling thing where you're just like, oh, I'm just right there with the person. But to me, it's very much like separate camps, where we're not usually doing anything like that. And so, what we usually look at our shoots as a way to really explore, creatively, what we can make with the visuals and with the music, and then, treating it as more like, oh, this is this video that will have legs, but it's not going to be on the 24-hour cycle, like stories are. It's going to be more like, this is going to be like a month cycle here, where I'm just going to keep hyping this, and I'll take 30 seconds out of it and put it as my story, so then people's there. So usually I don't really think it's in competition with one or the other, I think it's more just like different piles of a social media strategy, I guess.
I'm like always impressed with like how receptive and patient audiences actually can be, even considering like how fast-paced all of everything has become, and it's like TikTok and stories and everything. But then you look at like Billie Eilish is somebody that comes to mind, where like a lot of her music videos are just like really slow single takes. I think it was for My Power, was just like 2-minute drone shot of her like just really slow, getting closer and closer to her on a mountain, and then she has a snake, and that's it. and like she's like probably the biggest pop star now. I mean, she's like absolutely crushing it. And so I'm always impressed with even like pop music videos that are kind of catered towards the exact same people that should be liking TikToks and really fast-paced stuff. They actually like can have a patience and appreciation for that when it's well done. So I think that's something where kind of we just, yeah, that's kind of more our vibe and more our speed. And I think we just hope that it can still come across to people. There's also this company or site called Vivo, and they have an in-house production team that makes their own performance videos, and pretty sure they're always single takes. There's never any cuts, and I think they're pretty much always shot on film too. They're not digital, and they're with pop stars. I mean, it's like Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande and like huge names, but they're just like these really slowly evolving single takes of the camera just kind of like wandering around them in a space, and they have like millions of views, and it's like everybody loves them. So I feel like there's always going to be fans of that no matter what, even though the social like style of video has become so prevalent and fast and whatever. I think there's always going to be the people that like the more artful, like slower paced, actually like cinematic filmic kind of approach to it.
Yeah, it's like a frame of reference, you know, like if somebody's on TikTok, they're not expecting something long and
Right.
beautiful, you know. So if you're looking at a story, you're not expecting something, you know, something like that. So I think it's really just like when you're in EJAP, it's just like people are more than willing to sit for a long Billie Eilish video. We love Billie Eilish, in case you hadn't picked up on it. But yeah, her videos are great. Anyway, yeah.
It's hip even in like major films right now too, right? I mean, wasn't there that war movie recently? It was like meant to look like one shot for the
Yeah,
whole,
1917.
2 hours. Yeah, right. And it's so impressive when you do even watch like a short 10-minute sequence where it's very clear they've planned everything out, and the cameraman is following the actors, and it's very clearly one shot, and it wasn't an easy shot either. Sort of like, what's that band? They do like the treadmills.
Okay,
And-
go.
Okay, go, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like, wow, they like practiced that. I don't know. So it seems like that type
They
of.
did a TED Talk. Check that out sometime.
Oh, okay. I will.
Well, I said in the chat, I think Billie Eilish should have hired you to do her thing with the LA Phil, because that was not, when the orchestra was involved, it was very poorly done. I'm really sad to say. I think you would have done a much better job. Really. So
I did watch it through. The songs are great. I love that album.
it is great. It is great. And I was really expecting this to be awesome. And then it's one of those where they sort of, filmed the vibraphone player when he's not playing. And, it's one of those where it's like, oh my God, okay, who directed this?
How do you? I'm looking for it. How do you spell Billie Eyelash? I can't find it.
Shh, don't say that.
Just kidding. I know who she is. Just kidding.
Last thing that I wanted to say, this is a question, I guess. Has anyone seen the movie Victoria then, if we're talking about single shot movies? Oh my God. Okay. Evan and Kevin, this is a 2.5-hour movie a single shot 3 times in Berlin. It's insane. There are people like riding bikes standing on each other's shoulders, and nobody dies, and they jump over rooftops, and they run away from the police and rob a bank, and it's insane. It's a crazy movie. Look it up, Victoria, single shot movie. Totally insane.
Sounds great.
There you go. A little cinematic recommendations. All right, we want to hear, what is the one cinematic or video trend that people should abandon in 2021?
Sorry, I just looked that up, and it looks like Nils Fromm did the soundtrack, and we're big Nils Fromm fans, so I'm definitely going to watch that. Sorry to interrupt and go back, but
I'm
that's
glad. Thanks. Yeah.
anyway, sorry.
Go ahead. Tell us what we should abandon in 2021. What are we sick of in videos?
I think Kevin and I actually both agree on this one, which is like, now that gimbals have become like so affordable, I think they're a very like enticing thing to use. For anyone that doesn't know what a gimbal is, it's basically just like a motorized like stabilizer for a camera, and so no matter what your hand's doing, the camera will stay pretty secure. And I think we use them often, but I think they just have a time and place. And I think there's definitely a trend with like just, influencers and content people on Instagram where it's just the phone or the camera is just kind of floating all over the place, and sort of like movement for movement's sake. And just kind of coming from Kevin and my like taste in movies, we like a lot of like intentionality and very like deliberate camera moves, and so when it just kind of feels like aimless wandering, that's when we start to get pretty turned off. And I feel like with just how ubiquitous gimbals have become, it feels very tempting for everybody to just be moving the camera every direction all the time. So that's, yeah, I think I wouldn't mind seeing that trend leave.
Yeah, we were on the same page there.
You guys also seem to me like you pick cool stuff to create. I mean, it's you don't. What am I trying to say? Like there's everything I've seen of yours. It's of course really well done, but it's also just really good. Like you guys are in high enough demand that you get to pick really cool things to film.
We're very lucky that way, but also very lucky that we don't really say no to that many jobs. It's not like it's not like we like choice pick like the ones that we really want to do. Most of the stuff that just comes in is like, that'd be awesome. So we get pretty lucky without having to be like, oh no, I don't know if this is right for us. I mean, every now and then, that kind of thing happens, or if there's just scheduling conflicts and stuff. But a lot of time we just get really lucky where really cool people come to us.
But you must have done something really right to attract the cool people,
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe like because we're both in music like circles to begin with, like we both went to music school. I feel like we kind of started out already having sifted through a lot of like, if you just start a video production company that will shoot anything like weddings and commercials, and like then I feel like you might have to pick the things a little bit more. But because Kevin and I just like our circles are like new music performers and like interesting artistic people, I feel like it already kind of helps focus the people who come to us for projects already, just having been to music school and made those kinds of connections.
Yeah,
Right,
like you have the interest funneled from the very beginning.
For sure. It also like, we kind of had mentioned this already, and it feels like a place to say it again. There is no way that we would get the people that we're able to get unless we were musicians. So, for people now who are trying to start it out now, like it has been an indelible asset. Like there's been many times where, people have a schedule, and a lot of the times with like some of our other film friends, it's that whole machine is a machine, and so if it's like, okay, we have a shoot and it's this week to this week, if you can't make it, we're going to the next Rolodex. But as down the Rolodex, but as musicians, there's not as many of us doing the things that we do. And so we get very lucky that if we do get like overbooked in like November or something, a lot of the times we can be like, hey, like we're full up here, but can you wait another month and do it in December? And a lot of the times they'll be like, yeah, because for them, it's less just like going down the Rolodex to the next person, because there's a lot of people doing it. There's not that many people, doing what we do. And, so for people who are musicians looking to do film stuff, it's very handy, and musicians just feel more comfortable knowing that they can send you a score and say, I messed up on like beat 5 of measure 2005. And you're like, got it. We won't show you there, so that's definitely been a huge asset.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you definitely started a micro trend, at least, that I've noticed, which is there are all of a sudden a bunch of percussionists teaming up and starting their own production companies. How do you feel about that? And everyone looks up to you.
I view it as less of a trend that we had anything to do with, and more of just like a trend of percussionists as a whole. Like I always think this too. It always seems to be the percussionist who's the one who like figured everything out and like set up the audio gear and knew how to do the stuff in like the max patch, and knew how to, it's always the percussionist who somehow has to like always figure out the extra things on top of just their instrument. And I feel like it just like goes back to, you know, orchestral writing, where it's like, oh, if there's a gunshot and they're not going to have the flute player play it, you know, it's like, of course it's going to be the percussionist. Or it's like, oh, we need to have a clown horn or something that's not normally in the purview of a percussionist. And it's like, oh, well, they'll do it, you know, just give it all to them, it's fine. And so I feel like it's very much a percussion overall trend, that percussionists are like the ones who are like, yeah, I can do that, you know, and kind of have, and it's branched into video now as well. So I look at it as less of something that we had anything to do with necessarily, or maybe being bashful, but it's I think it's just a trend of percussionists as a whole.
No, it was you guys.
Definitely. Yeah, cool. Okay, so now we move on to some of these more nitty-gritty questions, which are for folks who do want to take the reins, you know, in their life and figure out how to do some of this. So we had this 3 situation thing that I sent you, which is how would you approach these 3 different scenarios? So A, you have no budget, but say you have a phone and a computer that function. B, you have $1,000 to produce something, and C, you have $10,000. So what are the best ways to spend our resources? Make a killer video.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I feel like, so I guess like as the budgets expand, it definitely doesn't feel like problems just magically get solved. It's actually like everything just kind of relatively comes up together, and so like the problems just get a little bit bigger, and like the production just becomes a little bit bigger in general, so which is also helpful. So like pretty much as soon as we know that maybe like a bigger budget comes in than the last one that we did, our first instinct is like, who else can we come like to help us out with this shoot? Like who else can we bring on as crew? And so like Kevin and I aren't making any extra money. It's more like, how can just the production get better as a whole? And that also applies to like gear, like rentals. Like we have in-house stuff, but another like one of our immediate questions is like, what could we rent for this that would make it look even better? And so once again, that money isn't coming to us, it's just going into the project. And then a big one I think is the location. Location is huge, and like location can do the heavy lifting for a lot of videos. And so like there have definitely been projects where like at least 50 or 75% of the budget has gone into the location, just because we feel so strongly that like this location is going to make this video awesome, and we might sacrifice a bunch of other things to make that location work. And so it all just kind of scales from there. So if we have 0 money, it's pretty much that like we don't have any help, so we're doing it all ourselves. We can't rent any gear, and so we're using all of our in-house gear. We can't afford a location, so maybe we do it at our home studio, or we go outside somewhere where maybe it's like we've done a shoot in my parents' backyard where it's like free. And so yeah, we can't like funnel money into any of those other things. And I think for the 0 budget version, that can mean that it sometimes becomes just a little bit more like editing heavy versus like shooting day heavy. I think some of the times when we've been working on really tight budgets, it's like the project has shifted into maybe it's like a stop motion-y thing, or maybe we buy like some stock stuff and we're like overlaying interesting textures, or like it becomes less about a big shooting day with a lot of people and gear and locations, but it just becomes a lot more like just Kevin and me and a computer or whatever. So that was my thought, but Kevin, feel free to.
Yeah, pretty much the same. It's just kind of the more money you have, and this isn't always true, but the more money you have, you know, the more, this isn't true at all, but I'm just gonna say it anyway, the more like it can give you some more flexibility. Yeah, more money, more problems. But it's like, you know, it's but that's not always true. Sometimes money does solve problems. And so, you know, if it's like, oh, you want to shoot into a window, and it's like, most people just look at that and they're like, oh, great, it's going to look great. And it's like, no, it looks great to your eye, but to a camera, it's going to look awful, you know, because if you want to shoot it at high noon, you know, looking out a window, it's going to come burning through in the camera. You're going to be silhouetted if you don't want the whole window to just be completely white and blown out and no information in your image. So it's like, okay, well, if we still want to shoot there, well, it's like, okay, well, now we have $2,000 or something. So it's like, okay, well, we can rent a really powerful light to try to match the sun inside so we can balance our exposure. You know, it lets us, so that's like somewhere where it actually does solve a problem. But yeah, it just kind of lets us expand a little bit. Yeah, we can bring in another collaborator if we wanted to work with a dancer, if we wanted to do, you know, something like that, or work with some kind of other artist. You know, we can expand the project a little bit. And like Evan said, it or we you spend a lot of it on the location, like we did with the one in the ship, where that was pretty much the entire budget. And I think some of our own money too, into the location to then you know, be able to do that. And we sacrificed ourselves too, because it was like it was absolutely bonkers in there, and it was very painful, but it was cool. And so yeah, so you can sink money into that kind of stuff. It just kind of helps overall. But yeah,
I like the comment about the collaborators too, because I feel like the more money, the higher on the wish list we can reach out to collaborators. An example that comes to mind is the Sunlux music video we did recently, where like we needed a dancer / mover in the video, and one of our favorite, if not maybe our favorite dancer to work with, and choreographer Kyle Marshall, like we just, as soon as we know we have the money to hire somebody like that, we just like want to hire them. And so we can just kind of like, yeah, move a little higher up on the wish list of people, like the dream team that we want to assemble for the project. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So speaking of finances, what was the smallest budget that you've ever worked with, and what was the biggest, if that's something you can disclose?
I mean, the smallest is probably nothing.
We can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, we've definitely had some projects where we like love the track and we like really fall in love with an idea for it, you know, and we're like these fit too perfectly together, and you know, they just don't have much at all, you know, and it's like, okay. And so in those instances, sometimes we're just like, because then it's just like it becomes half of like our creative baby and half of their creative baby. So we end up putting a little bit of skin in the game for that. It's not usually ideal, you know, since we are trying to eat, but you know, sometimes that happens.
Attempts have been recorded.
And so yeah, so that's always a nice thing to do, but that's not super common. So those are probably our lowest, and then probably our highest. It definitely varies quite a bit, because like it can be a high budget, but you look at the budget and you're like, and you realize that like 75% of that budget is going out, you know. So it's like we're working with the Curtis Opera coming up for their opera in November, and so it's just like a 12-day shoot, you know. It's a full thing. They're renting out the Prince Theater in Philadelphia. It's a huge thing. And so it's definitely our biggest budget that we've worked with. But you know, we look at the number and it's like, wow, but then it's like, we're getting none of that. Like that's literally going to everyone else, because you have to staff up so huge for those kinds of projects, which is kind of new territory for us. And so yeah, so it can kind of it's very, you know, it can vary wildly in terms of the budget, but it's kind of the same concepts across the board though, you know, that we're working with to try to figure it out.
So you mentioned a lot of times previously that you draw your inspiration from pop culture. We already said hello to the Queen, Billie Eilish, and the world of cinema. So yes, horns, rock on. But what are some recent videos that have blown your mind that you'd recommend to us?
One that was super inspiring to me recently, there's this directing duo called Rubber Band, stylized lowercase rubber band, I think maybe with a period at the end. But we've been a fan of just the format of kind of like visual albums for a while, kind of going back to like Beyonce's, like Lemonade is a big one for us. We just love that world. It feels like the perfect mix of like what we want to see in film and music combining. And I just watched this film that Rubber Band made with this hip hop artist from, I think, Montclair, New Jersey, so pretty close by, Topaz Jones, called Don't Go Telling Your Mama. And it's just super stunning, and honestly is, I think, a really interesting answer to the what we were talking about before of like the pace of TikTok and all that stuff versus kind of the longer form, because they actually found this really interesting format where they go through the alphabet. So it's like A to Z, each letter, and they basically come up with a like visual concept that starts with the first letter of that letter in the alphabet. And so the film is like about 30 minutes long, but it goes through A to Z. And so you're never on a concept for longer than, a minute-ish or less. And so it's like technically a long form kind of like half-hour thing, but you never get bored because it's just this like really interesting, like just kind of going through the alphabet. Also shot by cinematographer Chase Irvin, who for me might be my favorite cinematographer. Just really interesting framing and lighting, and so that was a big one that stuck out to me recently of like, that's what I want to do. Like it just was the perfect combination of so many things that I like seeing, and like the combination of music and film. So that was a big one for me.
Yeah, similar line with like what Evan was saying with like Lemonade and those kinds of things. With Sampha has another one that was just amazing, and they're just like these visual albums, but they're only like 30 minutes. And what's so interesting to me about them is that they're so like what's the word, like just not sacred with the music at all. It's almost like they just give it to the filmmakers and they just chop it up. Like they represent like the whole album, but there might be like one representation of the track where they literally just take the guitar line and they just play it, and then at the very like at the end of like some beautiful cinematic thing, they're just like, you hear like the drums maybe come up for a second, and then that track's over, and it doesn't sound like what the track actually is, but they just give it to the filmmaker, and they're like, just make like a cool film, and it becomes more of a score for what they're doing, as opposed to like, oh, like this is the music video and here's the song in its entirety, enjoy. It's more like an experience. So we're both like huge fans of that kind of a thing, and so we've gotten lucky with like a couple things where we've been able to play around with those kinds of ideas, and those are always like our most ideal. But personally for me, just yesterday I watched the trailer for Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, Licorice Pizza, which looks awesome, and I am a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan, so I went back down another PTA hole with The Master. I watched The Master again the other day, and Inherent Vice just on in the backgrounds. I just love all of his movies, and they're so beautifully filmed. So that's been my latest obsession.
That's awesome. Great recommendations for the rest of us. Thank you. So have you ever considered doing a long form feature film or documentary? You're going to do an opera now. That's obviously very long, but too long if you ask me. But what about feature film or not wedding style documentary?
Yeah, I mean, so Kevin has shot a feature film before. I've never done that. Kind of like a narrative feature film, kind of in the genre that we were just talking about the visual album. We did a project, I guess mostly last year, with Jean Lorenz, who's a trumpet player and super great. Also very similar influences as us. Lots of like Billie Eilish and Beyonce like references getting tossed around. And so that one I think ended up being around half an hour, but it was like fully like narrative. There was a story and there wasn't any performance footage. It was very much like kind of our stab at a short film kind of format. And there have been a few documentary projects that have come along, but none have been kind of feature film length. They've I think some have gotten into like the 20-ish minute, 20 to 25 minute range. we did one with the Trisha Brown Dance Company here in Philly that I think was roughly around that time. But in terms of like feature, 70 to 90 minutes ish, I think Kevin's the only one that has experience with that format.
It was a long time ago though, and it was and yeah, so that was the first stab at that. But it was very informative in terms of the absolute madness that comes with doing that kind of a thing. But I think like we were just saying, like, the whole like 30-minute, 40-minute visual album is something that we're really interested in. And yeah, the opera that we're doing, I think it will be like 60 minutes or something. So that'll definitely be probably the longest thing that we've done. But and it is going to be full film, world. We're not just like setting up cameras and watching them perform it for camera. Like it's going to be a full, just like an actual movie. That's what it's going to be. So, yeah, I think if the opportunity ever presented itself, I'm sure we would be very intrigued. But yeah, I don't know.
That's awesome. I will volunteer to recreate, but a 40-minute version of Beyonce's Hold Up. So if we find me a yellow dress and a bat, and I can smash a lot of cars, and I'll hire you for the best amount of money I can afford. So
Yeah, we can back that.
Tell us when we'll be there.
Yeah, the podcast will back that. You got it.
Yeah, there you go. We're gonna throw all of our money into this. You'll take all of our annual makings.
Going back to the budget scaling question, like the more money we have, the more cars Beyonce can run over with a monster truck. Really is what that.
Yes.
That's what's on our rate sheet. That's what it says.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. So we're about to wrap up here. It really feels like it has just flew by, and we barely get to scratch the surface. But thank you so much for sharing. And we have learned how your music has informed your filmmaking. But what about the other way around? How has your filmmaking informed your music ambitions?
I think for me, the time like behind the camera is really nice as just like a reset, like step away from music making. I feel like in our kind of niche of like filming a lot of music that we personally just like contemporary classical music and that kind of thing, I feel like our film productions are close enough to the kind of music that I like that I still am like inspired and like by the music and the people and like the just kind of like the overall vibe of it, but it's far enough away from like literally being behind a drum set or like writing something that it still feels like a step away, and so I actually like really just appreciate the perspective that little bit of like, I like alternating back and forth because I feel like when we're like really in the thick of a stretch of like a ton of like 410 shoots, like all I want to do is just like go thrash on my drums. And then like when I go on a tour with Square Peg, like I have all these visual ideas and I just want to get back and start filming stuff. And I really like having that, both of those opportunities to just like step away from the thing and get a little perspective and get inspired by different things than when you're just in the thick of it. So yeah, I think that's how the film kind of plays into the music for me, is it gives me a second to kind of see it from a different lens, literally. And yeah, just gives me that second to step away.
Yeah, and similar for me too. I'm not doing as much performing as Evan or writing as Evan, but it's just a different mindset. Honestly, I should do it more because it kind of just gives you a refreshing perspective, and then you kind of come out of it and you go back in. But it's also just like a very, because most of the stuff we're doing is not live, it's like we're filming it and then it's like that went wrong. It's like, just do it again. It's fine. And so there is like a little bit of a nice finality to like just being like, all right, I've just played this. It's done now. So there's like something nice about that you don't have quite as much when you're behind the camera. And so that can be kind of a nice thing. But in terms of creatively, I think it just bleeds into both so much because now Evan and I we listen to a lot of the same music that we like to film, and so it becomes very synchronous of like, oh, I heard this track and I had this idea that's super cool, and then like we just wait for the track that someone comes to us for, and we're like, yeah, sure, this could work there, so it definitely helps both ways.
Well, thank you so much for 10. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Kevin, for being our guests. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you, Karli. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Robin, for coming in and straightening up Casey a little bit.
Telling us he had the hiccups. It's important.
Yeah, the pickups.
The pickups. Yeah,
The
that's right.
pickups. There you go. Thanks, everyone. Really wonderful to chat with you all, and we'll see you on the next episode. In the meantime, go check out our Patreon page and all of that good stuff.
Thanks so
See you
much.
soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Did I mess up your outro there?
Totally.
I'm so sorry.
We have to repeat from, hi, my name is Ksenija Komljenović.
I feel like I spoke
No,
exactly
Child
when you said
prodigy.
goodbye.
Go back to that.
Child
Yeah,
prodigy, yes.
the prodigy debate. I like that.
I feel like I spoke directly over your last line.
No, why don't you say what you want to say, and
I
you'll
was-
see my wonderful video editing skills. Go, say it.
Thanks. Thank you. That was it.
That's all.
Evan, can you say thank you also?
Thanks.
You have to use that one so they have no context. Yeah. So it has to
But
sound
yeah,
very
thank
There's
you
good.
your
so much for-
Instagram clip for the week. Just Evan going.
This is all we needed. This is all we needed.